Can mute my mic now. I can mute my
When network is mixing up. Just doing the admin.
Does it work better?
I'm trying because I'm not sure now why we're freezing. It's 27, 6, 1, 2, 3. Maybe we have a load shedding somewhere around here. That's why
It's lagging.
it was smooth all along. So as long as we have audio.
It looks to be going on real time.
Yeah, let's see how it goes.
Are we on here? Good. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Is it morning or evening? Great. Colleagues, thank you so much for joining us in this session. My name is, can someone help me with this microphone? Or I can help myself. Okay. My name is Tabang Paho, and I'm from the Department of Forestry, Fisheries, and the Environment. I would like to welcome you to this interesting session. I must say it's going to be a wonderful session. Not that it's my passion project, but mainly because the session acts as a glue. And the session is on transformational development towards building adaptive capacity. And I must say we've got good speakers lined up for you. The people online as well, I'd like to welcome you. And we are going to have a wonderful time. Now, I just said that the topic is like a glue. And you can imagine when you start talking about developmental issues, how cross-cutting they are. Imagine all of the discussions that we've had this morning, the projects that we've seen yesterday, and some of the discussions that are still upcoming tomorrow. That when you start talking about transformative adaptation or transformational change in adaptation to build adaptive capacity, what we've had yesterday around science, policy, and practice interface, how is that for us helpful if it's not transformative or transformational? Now, this session is meant for us to discuss those, difficult and challenging issues, as we know, exacerbated by the triple challenge of, inequality, poverty, and unemployment. Now, having said that, there are rules of engagement in this house. We've got one speaker that will be virtual. That is Jonathan Ramaya, and I'll introduce him in a moment. So I'd like if perhaps they can put him on screen while he's presenting. And the mics should also be on mute. And then we request that all the speakers keep to the time when the time comes, particularly for the panel discussions. So Tandega will be helping me here to keep the time. And then with the messages online that are coming on the chat. Right. So our first speaker will be Mr. Jonathan Ramaya, and Jonathan Ramaya hails from the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment as the Program Manager and the Director of the Adaptive Capacity Facility. Jonathan has over 10 years experience working on climate change, both mitigation and adaptation. He has worked on project implementation in the public sector at national and local level. He has provided support to eThekwini Municipality's Energy Office on mitigation projects ranging from low carbon transport to ocean energy and building energy efficiency. He has also provided support to the then Department of Environmental Affairs on climate change adaptation projects and policy development, as well as adaptation finance, supporting green fiscal policy and finance instrument mechanisms. Jonathan will just be setting the scene for us this afternoon on transformative adaptation, what it means and what it means vis-a-vis incremental adaptation. Jonathan, over to you.
Thank you so much, Tabang, and good afternoon to one and all. Thank you to the organizers of this event for the opportunity to open this panel on transformational development to build capacity, adaptive capacity. Compared to the other panels, this panel is a bit more theoretical and abstract. So I guess those who have tuned in are into theory. But our quest should be to strive to make this topic tangible and implementable. Otherwise, it just becomes a talk shop. And what I want to do is maybe just to go through what the literature is saying about transformative adaptation, but also what our national climate change adaptation strategy is saying about transformative adaptation. And hopefully this lays a good foundation for the discussions that we are going to be having. As I said, it's theoretical, it's a bit abstract, and I hope that you aren't confused at the end of this speech or this address. But let's see how it goes. So what do we mean by transformative adaptation, or development to build adaptive capacity? And when one looks at the academic literature, it indicates that the concept is still very much evolving at an international level, but also at a national level. And the concept of transformative adaptation is most often juxtaposed against incremental adaptation. So you can look at transformative adaptation on the one end and then incremental adaptation on the other end. And in trying to understand transformative adaptation, it's worth digging in a little bit to understand incremental adaptation. So the way the literature describes incremental adaptation is that it is adaptation that responds mostly in an ad hoc manner. It's typically undertaken both during and following weather or climate related events. So it's almost as though you are sort of catching up and trying to adapt as you go along as these weather or climate related events take place. Whereas transformational adaptation has been described more as a journey, a plan, a route map. And within this route map, there are key moments, decision points where, dare I use the word, radical change is and can be possible. And often, as a contrast to incremental adaptation, transformative adaptation is undertaken prior to or in anticipation of the climate or weather related event occurring. In fact, the transformational adaptation should take place throughout the entire, path or the plan that needs to unfold. So transformative adaptation implies a fundamental shift within and across systems. When we pursue transformative adaptation in South Africa, if we choose to do so, the NAS or the climate change adaptation strategy certainly points towards that. How the term is framed has a bearing on how transformative adaptation is pragmatically, practically undertaken, as well as who or what is considered fundamental to improving adaptation response in the country. And I think sometimes as people in the scientific realm or in the climate change world, the environmental sector, we tend to be quite immersed in our work. And this happens probably in a number of other sectors, that we tend not to look at what's happening outside, what's going on around us. And we think of climate risk in this particular instant as being the most important risk that everyone should be focusing on, when in reality, that's not the case. And I think that when we're looking at transformative adaptation, we need to acknowledge the myriad of risks and threats that exist at a macro level. And we need to understand where that, where climate risk is, prioritized within these broad range of risks. And I think how that prioritization happens, where climate risk features amongst these broader risks that often interplay with one another, has a bearing on how and where we should be pitching transformative adaptation. In other words, where climate risk has been prioritized within a broader national risk profile will have a resultant outcome for what adaptation is going to look like in South Africa. So we often need to locate our projects, our work within the broader risk profile of the country that goes beyond climate. So it's important to understand the various systems within which transformative adaptation is unfolding. And as mentioned, it will have a bearing on the effectiveness of any selected adaptation, intervention, or option we choose to go with. And the aspect of the system that is thought to be most vulnerable is likely to dictate whether the issue is framed as having only a limited or local interest, or one that requires a system-wide and transformative intervention. So if climate vulnerability, which it should be and which it is framed as resulting from, deeply socio-political processes, then more disruptive transformational adaptation may be seen as necessary to address deeper system structures. And I think, while in other cases, incremental adaptation might be sufficient, I think this is particularly relevant as a qualifier for the applicability of transformative adaptation in South Africa comes to the design of on-the-ground interventions, and in addition to that, considering a framework for national transformative adaptation. So transformative adaptation can happen at two levels. I've spoken a bit now about the system level, but then at a project level, it can also be transformative. So I think we'll go into that detail a little bit. I'm mostly going to be talking about that macro or system level transformative adaptation. And I'm going to refer to a framework that's meant to be the basis, a policy framework that's meant to be a basis for action, which is the National Climate Change Adaptation Strategy. I think now it's about 3 years since it's been adopted. This is the main policy framework through which adaptation response in South Africa is outlined, and the branch that I come from, the Climate Change and Air Quality branch, is leading on the coordination of the National Climate Change Adaptation Strategy. I'm going to call it NAS for the time being because NCCAS is a mouthful. So when I say NAS, I mean our adaptation strategy. This strategy has a 5-year action plan that's based on, or at the top level, there are 9 broad strategic interventions. And these strategic interventions, to me, I read them as being transformative interventions, because if we get those 9 interventions right, then we are higher up on the value chain of what is considered to be transformative at a systemic level. So there are a number of mentions of the word transformative or transformational in the document. I just want to quickly touch on them. Right at the top, the NAS considers transformative change as one of the principles and key elements of adaptation and climate resilience. And this transformative change is essentially, the NAS says that it is needed to achieve the full implementation of the NAS. So really, it's quite a progressive, transformative, not your usual run-of-the-mill document. That's what we think as a department. Maybe there's a bit of bias there, but of course we are open to learning and interrogation further of the policy as we are in this period of implementation. So, continuing adaptation to climate change is also outlined as an opportunity to transform both the health and the economy, to strengthen the social and spatial fabric, and to become more competitive in the workplace. Apologies for the noise. I have some contractors at home. So what this is saying is that it's not necessarily that the action is going to be required by a change in the system. That is the case, but it's also saying that in implementing the NAS or the actions in the NAS, there is also an opportunity to transform the system. So there's a two-way flow here. There's a two-way dynamic where if you are looking at adaptation, you could impact positively health, the economy, the social and spatial fabric, and even economically, we could become more competitive when it comes to trade and the global marketplace. And the strategy then goes on again to acknowledge that systemic changes are required to minimize the impacts of climate change. So technology, again, is listed specifically as being one of those social and economic factors underscoring or being supportive of transformative change. So we need to look at technology as being one of those levers of transformative adaptation. If there are technologies that are coming on board that can change the way in which we produce food, change the way in which we could build our human settlements, this can, in a quick space of time, that word again, radical, bring about transformative changes. But technology, as we know, can be a disruptor, and we can get into that just now. But the NAS also describes the role of labor as being quite pivotal in advising on and supporting adaptation initiatives. And it particularly looks at the history of this country and labor groups, and also looking at the fact that labor groups are directly affected by the risks posed by climate change and the opportunities created by adaptation initiatives. So labor is listed as being quite important. I think those last 2 points have an interplay there. Technology and labor, when we look at the global rise of automation and AI, artificial intelligence, the NAS doesn't really tell us too much about what predictions and how the tension between technology and labor might play itself out in the arena of climate change. But I think when we're looking at a broader transformative adaptation agenda, we really need to look at this interplay, this dynamic between labor and technology. As I said earlier, the department is always open to understanding the relevance of its policy following its adoption. And we think that further analysis on the NAS is required. To look at the different actions listed, I think there are over 220 actions in the National Climate Change Adaptation Strategy. There are a lot of actions that need to be looked at to see whether these are transformative enough. But I think the interventions that we have, I'm going to move to a new spot. I think the interventions that we have,
at least at a systemic level, but I'll leave the participants to ponder on these different interventions. So I'm going to list them. There are 9 broad interventions of the NAS. The first intervention, it's in the general category, but this is around reducing human, economic, environmental, physical, and ecological infrastructure vulnerability and building adaptive capacity. So that's number 1. Number 2, develop a coordinated climate services system that provides climate products and services for key climate vulnerable sectors and geographic areas. And then intervention number 3, this is to develop a vulnerability and resilience methodology framework that integrates biophysical and socioeconomic aspects of vulnerability and resilience. So this is more around a framework or a tool. And if you want to know a little bit more about this, my colleague Faith Nkohla is in the room. So you're able to also just inquire a bit more on that. And then the 4th intervention, this is quite an important one because we as the department are not an implementer necessarily. We are a coordinator largely, and we are providing guidance around climate change. But this is around facilitating the mainstreaming of adaptation responses into sectoral planning and implementation. So this really requires us to work with our sister departments, Department of Water and Sanitation, Department of Human Settlements, which we have a number of programs with, tourism, we have a program with them as well. And again, my colleague Faith is leading the work on the sector mainstreaming. There's also another department we're looking at, and that's Department of Health. So there's some work ongoing there. It's very much framework guidance type of work, but eventually we hope these will lead to projects. Projects and programs and budgets being allocated towards these considerations. And then number 5, we've got promote research application, technology development, transfer and adoption to support planning and implementation. Number 6 is around capacity and awareness for climate change responses. There've been a number of programs, particularly at the local government level, around capacity and awareness. I think we've maxed out our benefits that we can get out of that, and we have quickly realized that, and we're starting to move now away from the capacity and awareness. But there's always a need for capacity and awareness as you have change of institutions and change of personnel within local government, for example. The 7th intervention is around effective governance and legislative processes, integrate climate change and development planning. And this is around using legal instruments to ensure that we are undertaking climate resilient development. If you want to know more about the upcoming bill, climate change bill, you can ask my colleague Thabang a bit more about that. But the climate change bill, which is currently undergoing a number of stakeholder consultations, hopefully will be become an act quite soon. And then this should hopefully ensure that there is budget flowing at a fiscal, level to programs and projects. And then number 8 is around climate finance. And I think for adaptation finance, we all know it's a lot more difficult than mitigation finance, particularly because adaptation finance is thought not to have this commercial viability in the way that you would have for climate change mitigation, where for renewable energy projects, you can have an offtake agreement and sell electricity, or you can have savings through energy efficiency projects. There's not a lot of that in adaptation, though there are some opportunities that I think we do need to explore, especially in terms of solutions that the market can provide for technologies that build adaptive capacity. So I think we need to look at climate finance, the flows of finance. These needn't be from multilateral funds or from bilateral funds or donors. We need to look at that in terms of the flows of finance from the fiscus itself, which is a bit difficult at this point in time, but it is worth having a look at the budgets that are flowing and to see where they can be mainstreamed. And then lastly, underpinning all of this would be an effective monitoring and evaluation system that tracks implementation of adaptation actions and their effectiveness. Otherwise, we might not be learning from mistakes, or we might be undertaking activities that in the end actually do not have any positive adaptation impact. So just to end off, I think I'm going to talk a little bit about programs and the importance of projects, on the ground projects. And even though we have these 9 interventions that are quite broad, I think that are at a systemic level, the NAS does recognize the importance of projects. And here now we're going from the system scale or the system level to a project level. As I mentioned earlier, projects can also be transformative in and of themselves. And, they can in a way exist despite what's happening at the system or at the macro level, and they can be transformative. And in some cases, they can even influence what's happening at a systems level. So the NAS says that there are a wide range of adaptation projects that are being implemented in South Africa, and it recognizes there are a number of different stakeholders and different sectors that are responsible for implementation of these projects. And they are spread across government departments, but they're not necessarily called adaptation projects. So we need to look at those and build on them. And then it also states that there are existing projects in South Africa that address human resilience and build adaptive capacity. And, some of these projects, there are complex relationships between climate change, diseases, and food security, and improving healthcare can help to build resilience of communities to better, be able to cope with the impacts of climate change. Another good example is energy security or improving the energy poverty situation in South Africa. I think we see what's been happening in Hammanskraal, and the fact that if boiled water is required, where's the energy going to come from? These things are very linked. So we need to look at those, improve programs that seem like they might not have relevance to adaptation, but in fact unlock the improvement of the adaptive capacity situation. I think in the environmental cluster, we as a department, as I mentioned, we're not necessarily implementers, but we are coordinators. However, we do have a branch or pieces of work, such as our Working for Water, Working for Wetlands programs that involve activities. It comes in at a different angle, largely around employment and the public works program, but we've found that implementation of these programs actually reduce the disaster risk profile of specific areas. And there's a very interesting project that Sandy is currently working on with the NDMC, as well as with our sister branch environmental programs, around building up of these programs and giving it a different lens, so that you're focusing on the disaster risk reduction element as your entry point. And then in the infrastructure cluster, many different projects can be looked at different spheres of government, involving climate proofing of settlements and infrastructure, as well as the development of local early warning systems, as you've seen in the communities in Mgungun Glovu. Okay, so more about projects, as mentioned, stakeholders, including non-government organizations, civil society organizations have a key role to play when it comes to projects. On the ground projects in particular for NGOs, they have quite a good relationship in many instances with communities, and they're able to then bring about more participatory project development, which ends up having a more sustainable impact going forward. Okay, so I think I'm going to leave it there. I think maybe one other thing that the NAS talks about is that we do have quite a developed financial architecture in the country. So a range of economic and financial instruments need to be investigated. Different models of public-private partnerships need to be looked at, different financial instruments like grants, equity, concessional and non-concessional loans and debt, and the operational funding of private and state-owned companies. I think we need to really investigate private sources of finance as well. If a bank like the Development Bank of Southern Africa has made commitments to go carbon neutral by a certain year, that means that their lending portfolio is going to change quite radically, quite dramatically. And if we have institutions like the DBSA or like your commercial banks that have, policies where they are not funding risky developments on the coast, property developments, I think that goes a long way in improving the adaptation scenario for South Africa. So let me leave it there on this quite complex topic. I think we've only began to grapple with it at a national level, and the NAS is helping us in this quest. It's good to already see, listening to the earlier discussions, that transformative adaptation is already being embedded at a project level, particularly through projects such as the uMngeni Resilience Project. So Thabang and colleagues, I'd like to leave it there. Thank you very much for your attention.
It's clear that, like I said, we cannot divorce transformational change or adaptation from the triple challenges of inequality, poverty, and unemployment. But also, there are issues and systemic issues that Jonathan has spoken to: social, economic, and what I didn't hear come up very clearly, maybe I missed it, but political issues, as well as other systemic issues that are there, behavioral change as well. But I think these are some of the things that we can delve down deep into as we have our discussions. I think on a macro level, he has spoken to those deeper system structural issues. And then again, going on the ground, I think most of us, I mean, even in the previous session, we've spoken to those design of the on the ground project, how that is done from the outset, how communities are involved, how traditional leadership is involved. And that talks to transformational adaptation or development in building adaptive capacity. And then he touched on another point, an important point from a policy formulation perspective, the National Climate Change Adaptation Strategy. And as an important umbrella document that we have with the objectives, the interventions, and the actions that are there, and how that paints a way for us for transformative or transformational development. With that, I would like to say that maybe for now, you just note your questions, and then we take the next speaker, and then the third speaker. I think it was supposed to be Ms. Snowy Makudu, but Mohammed, are you doing the presentation? Mohammed's going to do the presentation. Please note the questions and the inputs, and then we can have a bit of a discussion or question and answer session before we move into the panel discussion. But next up, I'm going to introduce our next speaker. And our next speaker on the case study is Professor Maxwell Mudara. Prof is an associate professor of agricultural economics at UKZN and director of its farmer support group. that makes relevant scientific knowledge available to smallholder farmers. It conducts action research to address issues pertinent to resource-constrained farmers. It also provides training advice and project support in sustainable farming, including agroecology, nature conservation, strengthening local institutions and enterprise development. Prof. Mudara's research looks at the economics of smallholder farming systems, incorporating production, water management, gender, policy analysis, food security, amongst many others. Prof, I'm going to hand over to you, and I need someone to help me with the presentation for Prof. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Yes, Christine, I think the CV needs to be updated, but I'll forgive you for today. A number of elements have since changed. But I think the correct things in the CV that I'm the director of Farmer Support Group, which is a unit within the University of KwaZulu-Natal. I'm also into research on water, food security, and others. The one that is wrong is associate professor. All right. So this is the topic I got from Christine and Tafadzwa. They say it's a transformational development, building capacity for sustainable progress. And this is supposed to be a case study from uMngeni district. So it's coming from the URP project. The Farmer Support Group at some point along the way was contracted to also have an input into how we can make the farmers that we are working with more transformed in terms of their approach to the activities that were happening. I think I was in one session on the other side. There are problems of locals at vandalizing things, not understanding why the project is happening, and not seeing where they are coming in. And our part was maybe to draw them closer, but also to make them feel a part of this whole journey that we were engaging. Maybe just as the last speaker, I'll have a few words to say about this transformational development and capacity building as they relate to each other. The point is that most development efforts come from outside. They are geared at very materialistic things. It's either we put some boreholes, we put some, construct some chicken pens and so on. And we want to see, just like the father was saying in the morning, we want to cut the ribbons, yeah? But in a lot of cases, we see that a lot of those do not go very far. They are destroyed, or they actually just left redundant and not being used. So they've got short-term goals. They are not going into the people's minds. They are meant to tick the boxes for the donors in a lot of cases. So we are saying that in this transformational development or capacity building for transformational development, we should be talking about processes that look at long-term positive change, long-term visions of where we are supposed to be going, even where when you are out of the place, then we should see that development going away or continuing to happen. We are also talking to what the chair was saying, that we've got issues that relate to the triple challenges: poverty, inequality, unemployment, and so on. We have to see how the projects that we are engaging are creating that space for addressing these challenges. But more, we have to see how we can bring an understanding that this is, there's ownership, the communities own what is transpiring. How do we ensure that they get an understanding of the resources that are being built or the efforts that are being put? So we are talking about having sustainability. We're talking about a holistic approach that looks at all the dimensions, and we are talking about inclusiveness. We are bringing everybody on board, not excluding any part of the group. And we are also talking about development that is maybe tallies with what the previous speaker was mentioning, that we are beginning to work from the individual, the micro level, but we should also see how we bring in an understanding of that, how that connects with the institutional level. So how do the Makoses and the Inkosi come in? And what is their role in these processes? So we are talking about building organizational capacity at the local level, understanding of the organizational fabric that exists. In other words, what is the local government's role? What is our role as farmers and so on? So we're talking about also nurturing resilience, self-resilience. I think there's a lot of talk about participation, how much participation should be in projects. And there are different typologies of participation, but basically what we are saying, we should be moving away from that kind of participation that only delivers to, and we should be moving towards participation that involves. So these different things could be saying many things, but basically that's what it is about. I think this other a picture also seeks to depict the same, that we are moving away from having the community, the project, and other players, you know, sitting in different corners and sending each other emails and so on, and the miseries. But we are talking about maybe coming together, but even in the long term, we should be all talking one language. It's a big ask, but maybe if we are in the middle one, better. So the training that was then required, if you can imagine, then the project wanted to do training which is transformative. And we are talking about building capacities that can equip people, not only about knowledge of what is happening, but the skills, maybe hard skills, but also in improving their own resources, because we are talking about climate change, adaptation, and so on. So we only played a small part. And so this case study is not the whole picture of this URP project. I think a lot of it, the hard part, is coming from the other side. We came from the soft side. There is the technical side, which is maybe some of you who went around, so the Gideons and so on, those are also activities that were done too, and people were trained in those. We came with the soft side of this project. This was sorry. This was in, I don't have to spend too much time on this. Pietermaritzburg, this was in Swayamani, where some of you went, and then of course in Richmond, we were in KwaZulu. We trained the community members in those two areas. The training seeked to empower individuals to analyze the root causes of their problems, but also, it also talked about climate change and how it relates to agriculture. We also talked about, maybe if we looked at the triple C's, maybe we need to talk about the business. What can they also do from the resources that they have? So the business planning and implementation. Also natural resource integrity. The other part, very soft, is about organizational leadership. Understanding the leadership that they had, giving honor to those who are in leadership, and learning to communicate effectively through these channels that they have set for themselves. So it's about the social fabric within the areas that needed to be strengthened. So a lot of times when you guys are talking, at least those in the technical side, they don't think about those things, but they are very critical for the continuation of the project. We had different trainings that were happening in these areas, group sessions, class like this, and also visiting different resources and so on. So I'm going to run through some of the sessions that were conducted. Some of them you like, others you not like. We talked about the usual. There's a lot of demand in rural areas about the cooperatives, but our role was not to say form cooperatives. Our role was not to force cooperatives, but was to bring an understanding of what cooperatives are and what they can be as a vehicle. What can they help you to achieve? And what are the members' roles within the cooperative? There was one side like that. There was also the issue of just how to resolve conflicts. There are soft skills that we have, or tools that we have, for just allowing people to understand how communication is done and how conflicts can be resolved, or even how conflicts arise, which then make projects not work or work. We also wanted to inculcate an understanding of the resources that they have. We might talk about there's degradation, we need to get deals and so on, but if people don't understand that these resources are theirs, and if they put resources together, they can end up deriving a livelihood from what they have, rather than looking outside. So ABC is basically talking about transformative inclusiveness of asset-based. These are the assets that they have, asset-based community development. So it looks at what you have in terms of human resources or natural resources and other resources. And then we looked at marketing. A lot of times in the project, and those who went around, there's a bit of production, but if people are not capacitated to then market, or even when they are doing their own things in their own private enterprises, if they don't know how to market, everything comes to frustration because they are not able to take it a step further to realize an economic outcome from those resources. And then we also engaged in value addition. I think you saw in the last slide here, women working on value addition, preservation of the commodities that they were producing. And then last, we also talked about business and financial management. Understanding how a business is managed, adapting the culture of financial recording, the culture of recording, and also keeping books, because a lot of farmers in the rural areas were not able to get any benefit from government because government was saying, we want to see your records. So you're excluded because you're not keeping records, and yet there was an opportunity. So here we say in cooperatives, this is the precise breakdown of what we talked about in cooperatives. We start about the constitution, of course, and but also understanding of the primary to tertiary kinds of cooperatives and how they could fit into any of those. Conflict resolution, we're talking about group coherence. If you form a group to farm and so on, how do you, what are the sources of problems that you can frustrate you and so on? And also increasing the cooperation among group members. And then in terms of ABCD, we're talking about understanding of the capitals, what is available, and also allow the communities to discuss how they can use the different resources for their own livelihoods. And then ownership. This was very critical for this kind of project. When there are interventions that are building, trying to improve the integrity of the natural resources, they have to see how that connects to their resources building and how they can end up having better gardens, more sustainable gardens, and maybe sell more to the market and get more money. How does that connect? Is it only about doing the Gideon, or it's also going to turn around and benefit us? And this understanding was helpful in that regard. Marketing, I cannot overemphasize this, but we explored the marketing channels per se. If you are going to do this, maybe we take them halfway through to say, let's go and talk to the market and value addition, I've already alluded, and then budgeting. These are things that are difficult in the spaces that we all work in. But we have to make an effort. There are seeds in the rural communities of people who understand or can do some bit of numeracy that can start building, and hopefully in the long term, it will all come right. So we managed to train on average on each of those sessions, the things that I've listed in that previous slide. These are all sessions that were done. And on each of those, in Swaimani and in Jazuga, there were 44 and 34 in Jazuga. So the numbers varied, you know, in rural areas. Others will come, others won't come. Yeah, but 44 to 34 and 34 in Jazuga, less numbers for those 16 sessions. And what we found is that, well, sorry, I jumped. Can you just go back to my slide? I'm using. All right. I'm just going to go back. Yeah. So what we've seen is, in general, is that the group's members could organize themselves. They could organize themselves and mobilize the communities for livelihood enhancement. We also found that there was more cohesion, social capital was strengthened, and the groups were managing to engage in activities along the value chain, not only in terms of preservation that we have talked about, but also making an effort to market their produce. And there was a lot of excitement about that. There was, as I've said, with a bit of challenge, some awareness of budgeting, that we need to budget and keep account and so on. Again, I'm going to, you need to go back. This is I'm very sorry. Right. There were also some technical competence on climate change that were brought from the other side. And we hope that it created some bit of wholeness in the farmers that were community members that we're working with. And it could have enhanced their security, food security, and their income sources. So in summary, capacity building for sustainability can maybe lead to transformative development. Hopefully they can take forward, and what would make us happy if we go there 5 years from now and see them still doing their things because they had a good understanding. Because the development then becomes organic. They don't wait for people from outside, but they've got enough institutions, enough structures that they can continue working and interrogating where they are in terms of development. We hope that will continue in these areas. But that was the task we had in this URP project. I hope the case study helps. Thank you.
I think we can do better. Prof, thank you so much. I am gathering that we only beginning to warm up, colleagues. I think as an implementer, Prof, and someone who has been on the ground and worked with communities, I think the issues resonate, and I'm sure with a lot of the colleagues that have joined us in the session. I mean, one, when you spoke to the issues around business and financial management, and if you have worked with farmers on the ground that are producing something on the ground and they are trying to get it to market, how challenging that can be, and how these farmers and communities find it challenges. They have their own, sometimes they have their own way of record keeping, you know, which is not always compliant to what the donors or someone with money might be looking for, you know, and those issues are resonating. Quite important issues as well when we look at transformational development or adaptation or change. Prof, you mentioned, you know, sweet and sour issues, and the sours around the short-term goals when it comes to, you know, donor funding and donor expectations as well. Just pleasing donors or ticking boxes. When we look at this from a transformative adaptation perspective, what does this mean for us? You know, who is setting the agenda? Someone asked me in one meeting, you know, how are we beginning to see things, and how are we beginning to start developing projects from the ground up, and us influencing policy and so forth. Inclusiveness, holistic ownership. I mean, this is another thing that has been emphasized throughout since yesterday when we went on the field trips. And with that, Prof, I mean, I'm sure there are questions that are out there, and I'm going to reserve time for us to have discussions around these issues. And as we look towards transformative adaptation or transformational development. Prof, I'm not sure if you're aware of Trafotra. I've just coined this thing now when I'm sitting there. And this is training for transformation. And I think that's how you should have titled, this is how you should have titled this talk, Training for Transformation. Yeah, maybe a last round of applause for Prof. Now, this is your moment, Mohammed. We were supposed to have Miss Noe Makubu, as I said, from IAPASA. the Environmental Assessment Practitioners Association of South Africa, but she couldn't be with us and said that Mohammed will do the presentation.
Good afternoon to one and all, and thank you to the uMngeni Resilience Project for inviting IPASA to attend this event. So firstly, I should say that apologies from the IPASA chairperson, Snowy Makudu, who is a meteorologist by profession, and she would be able to give you a much more in-depth view. But nevertheless, we make do with what we have, and so let me introduce myself. My name is Mohammed Vauda. I am a PR support at IPASA, but I am not really a PR by trade. I'm actually an environmental scientist. So yeah, I'll be taking you through the presentation today. So we were tasked with speaking about transformation and capacity building and how we can relate it to climate change, and what does IPASA do to bring about change. So yeah, let me continue. So the outline of my presentation for today would, sorry about that, is I'll give you a basic introduction about who is IPASA, what do we do, IPASA's objectives, IPASA's transformation objectives, IPASA's CPD policy, our mentorship program, and then I will leave questions for the audience. So an overview on IPASA. So who is IPASA? IPASA is a registration authority established under the Section 24H Registration Authority Regulations of the National Environmental Management Act, NEMA Act 107 of 1998. IPASA is also a statutory professional body recognized by the South African Qualifications Association in terms of the NQF Act 67 of 2008. So what is IPASA's vision? IPASA's vision is to create a transformed profession of competent, ethical, and legally registered environmental assessment practitioners contributing to South Africa's sustainable development agenda. And what is IPASA's mission? IPASA's mission is to advance the quality of environmental assessment practice in South Africa through the registration of APES. So basically, IPASA is there to regulate and standardize the environmental assessment sector. So what are IPASA's objectives? So IPASA has four main objectives. Firstly is to provide relevant authorities, development proponents, and the public in general with quality assurance regarding environmental assessment practitioners And we do this by establishing criteria and this is CPD, as well as professional experience and procedures for registration and sanctioning of EAPS. We also do this by upholding a defined code of ethical conduct and practice and acting in the best interest of the environment, sustainable development, and the public good, as well as establishing disciplinary procedures and sanction mechanisms. IPASA also promotes continued professional development for EAPS in South Africa, making sure that EAPS uplift, develop and continue to grow themselves and keep up to date with what is happening in the sector. IPASA also promotes the transformation of environmental assessment practice through the empowerment of Black and female professionals, as well as historically disadvantaged individuals. And lastly, IPASA hopes to promote the awareness of the purpose and practice of environmental assessment in South Africa. So these are some registration stats as of the 7th of June, 2023. 64% of IPASA members are registered EAPS. So let me differentiate for you between registered and candidate EAPS. Registered EAPS are members that have more than 3 years of experience conducting environmental assessments, such as environmental impact assessments, whereas candidate EAPS are those that are fresh out of university, who are looking for experience in the field. And currently we have 311 applications being reviewed. And regarding environmental impact assessment, there's a paradigm shift moving away from environmental impact assessment towards climate change impact assessment. And climate change impact assessments are more related to the theme of this Indaba, in terms of looking at how long-term, how development projects will affect will have climate impacts, both to the environment as well as to people. So looking at socio-economic as well as ecological impacts. So what are the IPASA transformation objectives? So IPASA maintains a quality assured environmental assessment practice using relevant standards of education and registration, the re-registration based on CPD development. So IPASA members have a continuous cycle. It's a 5-year cycle. And in order to uphold your membership with IPASA, you have to make sure that you are submitting CPD. So you are taking yourself to conferences, you are presenting at conferences, and you are doing your work to the highest ethical and highest best practice possible. And IPASA also looks at a transformed environmental assessment profession. So this must be representative of the demographics of the South African population. IPASA also hopes to improve awareness of environmental assessment practice through communication to existing and potential members and the public at large. And IPASA hopes to be a capable, credible, and efficient registration authority through the practice of good governance and service excellence. So this is a graphic just showing the transformation charter and strategy of IPASA from the very beginning when IPASA was established, and moving, we have now moved on to phase 3, which looks at outreaches. So we're trying to outreach people, especially scholars and students in universities and in high schools, and trying to advocate and promote the environmental assessment profession, and try to make scholars and students aware aware of the importance of environmental professions. So as a professional body recognized by SACWA, IPASA has to maintain CPD. IPASA members have to maintain CPD. And IPASA CPD policy ensures that registered EAPS not only develop and uplift themselves, but also contribute to skills transfer, capacity building, and awareness raising in the environmental assessment sector. This is achieved through the IPASA mentorship program, which assists aspiring candidate EAPS to develop knowledge and skills complementary to the environmental assessment practice. And this is to enhance competence and career prospects while concurrently gaining the required work experience. So as mentioned before, candidate EAPs are EAPs that are fresh out of university. They have no experience. They have no professional know-how. And in order to transform, not only based on race and gender, but also to transform our skills from the experienced and the experts in the field to the youngsters in the field, the youth, people like me who need the experience and need the know-how. So IPASA's mentorship program hopes to achieve this by pairing candidate EAPs with registered EAPs who have years and a wealth of experience. And by doing this, we hope that candidate EAPs are able to absorb enough know-how and enough technical expertise so that they one day will be able to advance the environmental assessment profession. So as I mentioned before, IPASA has been doing a lot of career and university drives, and this was being introduced has been introduced recently, whereas IPASA has been trying to conduct many roadshows and university drives where we have been attending or hosting numerous workshops. And this shows that IPASA has efforts to increase capacity building at university and high school levels. So these are just a few images that that were taken at some of these workshops. And top left and the top right were at the University of Pretoria, and this was in the last 2 months or so. And the bottom left was when IPASA hosted a workshop at the University of Witwatersrand. And bottom right is when IPASA was hosting in Nsako High School. So it's campaigns like this that make sure that IPASA maintains and achieves its transformation objectives. So how does the IPASA's mentorship program help candidate EAPs? So by pairing candidate EAPs with registered EAPs, candidate EAPs are achieve at least 3 years of appropriate professional experience working on EIAs. They're also exposed and undertake at least 3 IAs or environmental impact assessment reviews, basic assessments, or Section 24G applications at an appropriate scale conducted while they hold primary responsibility in the projects. So it's one thing giving a young person a chance. Sorry, 5 minutes. Oh, thank you. It's one thing giving young people a chance, but by putting them at the forefront of projects, you are empowering them. And that's the hope of IPASA's mentorship program. And the mentorship program also assists candidate EAPs to meet the requirements, and within 3 years, they are eligible to be upgraded to full environmental or a registered member, meaning that they are now have the required competence levels to be able to undertake projects themselves. IPASA's mentorship program addresses transformation, skills transfer, capacity building, and awareness raising in the environmental assessment sector. Thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it. And please save the date for the IPASA Regional Conference from the 23rd to the 25th of October, 2023. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mohammed. From an association point of view or perspective, we note the movement towards the climate change impact assessments, the continuing professional development that you've mentioned around the skills transfer, capacity building, and awareness. Colleagues, what I would want to do now is a question and answer session from the floor. We've had our 3 speakers, Mr. Jonathan Ramaya, who touched a bit on those deeper system structures and a bit on the National Climate Change Adaptation Strategy, the design of the on-ground projects. Prof as well has also spoken to some issues around training for transformation. Are there any inputs or questions from the floor? Questions, inputs? Faith? Yes, ma'am. Please wait for the microphone.
I had Prof. Working. I had Prof talking about improving social capital with some of the groups that they worked with. I just wanted to get a bit more information on like the kind of activities they undertook to get to a point where they felt that they strengthened the social capital of those farmers that they were working with.
Maybe we can do this. Let's take the other question at the back and then we can respond all at the same time. Go ahead, sir.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
This question also goes to Prof. When doing the transformational adaptive capacity, when formulating the proposals at the beginning, then do you ever maybe have in that room of the proposal formulation, do you ever have a person from the community that will benefit directly from the project that you are trying to get funding for? I think my question is clear, Prof. Okay.
Okay, Prof is nodding his head. It means it's clear. And then let's take the third one, Lungi. Prof, I hope you are noting the questions.
Thank you. My question is for Mohammed. So Mohammed, you mentioned the climate change impact assessment that EFSA is moving towards. I'm just wondering if you could just tell us a little bit more about those. And also, we've been speaking a lot this morning about the importance of integration in our approaches. And I'm wondering if there has been a consideration, rather than having a separate type of assessment, to incorporate climate change considerations within the current regime of environmental impact assessments. Thanks.
Thanks. I hope that was clear. Okay, that's all. We've got 3 questions, Prof. 2 for you, 1 for Mohammed. We don't have a question for Jonathan online. No question. The cameraman has a question, but no. Okay. Slindile, there's a question there. Okay, that's our 4th person.
Hi again. So my question for, can I sit down? My question for Jonathan is that he spoke about systemic change and transformational change. And I think for my benefit and my learning, it's important for me to kind of understand how do you then, what processes or approaches or tools do you use to analyze the system in order to unlock that transformational change? And this is important when you consider program design, project design for all practitioners here and myself. And the second question is around how do we then track that change? Because now we're speaking about not ticking boxes, because that's not a fundamental change. But when you're looking at transformational change, you're looking at a shift in the whole system. How do you then track that change or that learning in order to say that we have reached that threshold and say that it is transformational enough? Thanks.
Difficult question. Yeah, but Prof, maybe let's start with you and then Mohammed and then Jonathan last.
Two easy questions. Yes, I think we are all familiar with this question of social capital. It's a capital that we gain by having people that you associate with and people that you can rely on for information or for resources and knowledge and so on. So what normally happens when it's not there is that there's even fighting. People are scrambling for, things that are coming from a donor, or even fighting amongst themselves, and not, what we are saying is when you then make them aware and build coherence within the groups, then they begin to know how to work together, and they can rely on each other. And the sum of the individual units are less than when they are in a group, because now they can function well. It's easy to say we can send mama so and so and so and so to go there, because we can count on that person being part of us. So that's where we're saying we saw that growth in the groups from where they were antagonistic amongst themselves to being cooperative amongst each other. Yeah. I hope that answers the question.
Thanks. Thank you.
The second question was from the gentleman at the back, saying when you are making these training plans of yours, do the communities participate? You see, in this particular one, if you want to be specific, it was informed. Let me say, to answer your question very straight, there was nobody from the community, but it was this training did not come right at the inception of this project. They came along the way after we had observed, or even the project implementers had observed and we had interacted with the communities, having meetings. So not necessarily when you write the project proposal, but in the process, they are very much involved and integrated. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Prof.
He doesn't seem to be convinced, but
He will get a
that's
chance.
the good.
He will get a chance later on again. Mohammed?
Thank you very much for your question. So let me give you a background on climate change impact assessment. So first of all, what is it? First of all, let me give you what is an EIA. I'm not sure if everyone knows what an EIA is. So an environmental impact assessment is an assessment that's done prior to a projected development, such as build a housing development, a hospital, a road network, whatever it may be, whatever the development project may be, prior to any commissioning of the project, there has to be an environmental impact assessment to ascertain what impacts on the environment, whether positive, whether negative. For example, what impacts will be on the soil or the water, biodiversity, air quality, looking at these kind of aspects of the environment. So we're looking more specifically on climate change impact assessment. The purpose of climate change impact assessment is to look long-term, to look at the long-term impacts of a proposed development on the climate. And this, you could probably look at it from a carbon footprint perspective, or whether that project is actually aligned with our frameworks and our legislation. So it's more long-term as compared to an EIA, where EIA looks at more short to medium-term impacts. Climate change impact assessments are more long-term, looking at it from a more overarching perspective. And your question, why don't we just integrate it with EIAs? And I fully agree with you. There's no need to create a separate assessment away from EIAs. Perhaps what can happen is climate change impact assessments can take on the role of a specialist study within EIAs. Like you would in an EIA, you would get a specialist study on water, on biodiversity, on soil. You get all these specialist studies are done. So within an EIA, what can happen is you will be able to have a specialist study done on what are the impacts or what are the anticipated impacts of a development on the climate, and an outlook on it, and maybe how to mitigate that going forward. I hope I answered your question. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Mohammed. Jonathan, over to you.
Thank you to the participant for that very difficult
we can't hear
question.
you.
Can you hear me now?
Jonathan?
Yeah,
Also
can you
out.
hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, I was just saying thanks to the participant for that very difficult question. It's something that we need to uncover and try and understand what tools, or even develop the tools that might allow us to decide whether one intervention over another or one program over another is transformative or not. And I think the starting point should be the National Climate Change Adaptation Strategy, because this really guides adaptation response in the country. And I think one of the critiques one might have about a large strategy like this with an action plan, though it has an action plan attached to it, which is time bound, and I think that's a good thing. But where do you start when you have over 200 actions? And at the same time, you can basically look at any type of project and find a place or a home in one of these actions, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going for the most transformative or the most high impact action. So I think there needs to be some kind of an exercise, and it's not to create more work, because this is something that I think we also need to be wary of, is the overdevelopment of tools, doing too much of guidance type of work when we should actually be getting down to business. But this for me falls within the ambit of M&E in general, around trying to measure how transformative a particular program or a particular project has been. And there are elements that, or indicators that you can extract that can form a composite transformative indicator where you measure actual transformation, where you measure actual impact, high impact of specific projects. So I think there is a need to do, number one, a prioritization exercise. And this doesn't need to be an extensive piece of work, but it's an exercise where you're looking at all the actions and then you're ranking them from the most high impact to the least high impact. And this gives some guidance, at least for those who have extensive budgets, on where to direct their resources. But again, there would be some flaws in a system like that, because what might be a high impact for you at a national level or at a sector department level might be totally different for you within a specific locality. So it gets tricky, but I think for me, a prioritization, a value chain, maybe that's not the right word, but a sort of a value scale of high impact projects to low impact. And for me, a high impact program would be a program that, for example, looks at our fiscus at a national level, and it tries to allocate resources towards climate change adaptation response. That means that you then have an ongoing source of funding. You're not relying on donors. I think the second speaker alluded to this issue around donors, and I think that's something that we need to really properly unpack, is the fact that we have a lot of adaptation initiatives that have taken place in the country, quite a number of programs, but many of these programs have been funded by external sources. And there they look at projects where you can take photographs of, right? And we know that adaptation is not necessarily a once-off thing. It is an ongoing process. One needs to build it into the operations of a company or into service delivery and things like that. So those are the types of things that I think donor projects don't really allow for. And I think that we need to be clever with how we actually utilize donor financing. And I think one of the ways in which we do that is by trying to leverage additional resources. But I think I've gone off the topic in terms of that question. The tools, as I say, let's look at a value chain of adaptation responses, and then how you track those tools. I think there needs to be an indicator incorporated into our broader M&E system that looks at the transformative impact of some of these projects. It's a very good question, though. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jonathan. Am I on? Yeah, I say I note your hand. Good. I note your hand, but what I would want to do at this point, you're probably wondering about the gentleman in the middle. And you know, dynamite comes in small packages, so I saved the best for last. Right? And Mr. Lindo Kanyile from the South African National Biodiversity Institute. And Mr. Kanyile is an assistant director, demonstration catchment under the ecological infrastructure for water security project, EI for WS at Sunby. He is responsible for the coordination and reporting of activities, monitoring and evaluation, supporting the implementation of this project. He has previously worked as a learning network coordinator and senior project coordinator for the URP at the Mgungundlovu District Municipality. Mr. Kanyile's areas of interest are capacity building and project management. He has worked on numerous environmental capacity building initiatives with NGOs, community members, councillors, educators, and learners. With that introduction, I would just quickly like Bablindo Kanyile to tell us what has been his experiences on the URP regarding project implementation, right? And you envisage that these interventions, do you envisage them to be transformative or to bring transformational change? Mr. Kanyile.
Thanks, Tabang. Yeah.
I told you we just warming up. We just have a day for the session.
Yeah. Thanks, Chair, and then good afternoon, everyone. Working for the project URP, it has been an experience. It has been quite an experience for me, a learning growth. Yeah, but the project itself, it is a very innovative project. The intervention are very innovative. It's something that hasn't been done before here in South Africa. You're looking at the different components of the project, looking at component one, where we're trying to do early warning system for lightning, for floods, the agrometeorology information that our farmers in KwaZulu and Swaimane are receiving in their language that they can understand. It's something that is groundbreaking. It's never been done before. Looking at the intervention around component two, the build infrastructure that we saw, and also the intervention around ecological infrastructure. It's something that it has been done, but it has not been done the way it has been done in Vulindlela. The methods, I think Prof. Mudara has alluded to that, the type of trainings that our farmers has been receiving. It's something that has not been done before. Even the project, the way it was designed, the project itself, the way it was designed in terms of collaboration, partnerships, because this project, it has been built on partnerships. As you can see, you hear the name of the Sunby, there's uMngeni, there's University of Natal, and other whole host of partners that have been involved in implementing this project. It's something new. It's something groundbreaking, and things like the incorporation of the indigenous knowledge system. We talked a lot about that yesterday when we were coming on site on how the indigenous knowledge system has been incorporated in the interventions of the project, and also the whole integrated approach that the project is taking in terms of trying to marry different interventions. Yeah, it has been a groundbreaking in terms of transformative change. For me, a transformative change, there needs to be some sort of an agency. In this case, like a climate change has presented that agency. The formation of powerful coalition, the co-creation of a solution has been evident into this project. Thus, I can say the different intervention has been transformative. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much. At this point, what I would like to do is pull in a provincial an official from the province, if they're here. So Taban Gamba, I don't know if he's in the session. Linden was also here from the province. If there's anyone who can represent, and if there's one who can also speak to local government issues. Why am I doing this? On a national level, Jonathan has spoken to issues surrounding, policy formulation, legislative frameworks, etc., the National Climate Change Adaptation Strategy. But the mandate for implementation, we know, lies with local government and province. Now, we would also want to hear from them and their perspective. What is transformative adaptation with regards to implementation of projects? Now, I see the adaptation network is also here, and it's a representative also of civil society organization. I'd also like to pull them into the discussion and to hear from them as well on transformative adaptation and from their perspective as implementers. What does transformational development with regards to capacity building mean for them? Anyone from province? Baba. Please stand. Okay, local, you are. So we just want to get, you just came in now, your take on transformative adaptation with regards to implementation of projects on the ground.
Thanks. I'm Bali. I'm from the Provincial Department of Economic Development, Tourism, and Environmental Affairs. I joined the department last year, so I'm just over a year in the department. I am within the climate change component. And the program, the province is quite committed to assisting local government in particular to ensure that their climate change work is aligned to the KZN climate change strategy as well as the implementation plan. So the strategy is awaiting final approval, but the implementation plan is already being rolled out. So there are programs happening at municipal level, but coupled with that, what we've realized, I'm going to come back to the transformative bit, but what we are realizing as a province, because we have to support municipalities, the districts, implement their climate change response plans, which are in existence. They were compiled with support from National Environmental Affairs, but most of the districts are actually not doing the work that they are supposed to do. That is contained in those CCRPs. And the challenge is twofold. It's the funding that's not been allocated for the districts to then implement the programs that have been set out to be implemented to respond to climate change. But there's also serious capacity challenges. So as a province, we feel we have a role because they are due now to be updated. I think in less than a year, that process will start, which is driven by National. And we just feel like they are going to update some of the plans that have actually never been implemented. So maybe let's help the districts review those, and we assist them find out the lower hanging fruits, things that can be done with limited capacity, and programs that can be implemented. For instance, the education and awareness programs. Every district has that in their CCRP, and those don't necessarily need money. And there is enough capacity in the districts to actually assist the districts to implement some of that work. We are then moving into a space where the work has to be transformative in a sense that, as it's been emphasized since yesterday, the approach needs to come from the bottom. We cannot implement programs that exclude the people where the programs are being implemented. Because as we have seen, not only here, but in other environmental programs as well, we normally come with a plan that satisfies the environmental mandate. But usually, because the environment is not, people aren't fully aware of what the environment is capable of doing, you find that we come with an environmental proposal to tackle a serious environmental issue, but the locals where the degradation is happening aren't really fully aware of what it's causing. They have other problems. I'll make an example. We want to restore a river system or rehabilitate a river system, but the community where the river system lies wants electricity. They will participate in the project because we are coming with the project. So the project is employment. So even though it's not a priority, we're not going to say we don't want it because there is some benefit to it. So our understanding as a province of transformative initiatives is the co-creation that's been talked about as well here. So we are actually supporting a program which is being implemented by municipalities. It was a baby of eThekwini municipality, but it makes sense to us as a province. It's the format in which the program is being rolled out makes sense. It's called the Transformative River Management Program. And it really encourages the working with the people from the planning stages so that after they've collected the waste as part of the project, the component that they're being paid to do, we actually don't want to see the same people and their families that have been working in the project dumping where they are not supposed to be dumping. So there is big support. We may not fully understand all the aspects of how transformative these things can be, but we are supporting and we are starting to roll out work that falls under transformative approach umbrella.
Perfect.
Sorry, I took long.
Thank you, Sis Mbali. And is there anyone from the civil society organizations who just want to come in? Ellen, can we have a microphone?
Thank you, Tabang. My name is Ndabugo Majola. I am from Build Environmental Support Group. We actually provided some of the capacity building for part of the program, URP, in particularly for traditional leaders in some of the areas. My take actually on what Tabang you were mentioning, I think this is probably a pilot, and there's been some good outcomes and initiatives, as well as tangible products which have been designed, developed, implemented, and utilized. And we've actually seen from our excursions, as well as from beneficiaries. I think that's the good, and it's a plus. But from I'll probably point to some of the challenges and negatives which I'm seeing. Other state institutions will require you to be within their frameworks in order for them to put whatever you are proposing in their budgetary cycles. That's how the state works. The local government is also similar to that. So if your initiatives and activities are not in their plan, either your integrated development plan or some strategic plans or your SDL, your spatial development plans, yes, we will probably, they will pitch up to your events, but the municipality is not going to implement anything towards that. So there would be a need to try and get that to be on their development plans. Let me be specific. I'm not saying go and put budgets into their plans, that this is what you're going to do. No, I'm saying these are the plans which are required to be undertaken in order to probably adapt to the climate. Who funds that? That is another matter. But what's important is that if those are within their integrated development plans, the cooperative governance department, which is a department on its own, is going to step in and actually trigger the intergovernmental relations protocol, which will involve you, DEF or other institutions coming in order to fund those programs. So if they are not there, then it becomes difficult for municipal officials to actually engage meaningfully going forward. And also, how do you get in as well? Because the problem and challenge for most of us is how do you get champions and how do you determine that you get to your local champions within? In KwaZulu-Natal, we happen to have what is called war rooms. All those are initiatives from the cooperative governance department, a provincial wing of the KwaZulu-Natal government. They run war rooms into each and every ward in the municipality of this country. And those war rooms, any stakeholder who's got an interest within that ward could go and speak to the role players, especially the ward committee, and present. And then obviously be able to get through the processes of planning within the municipality. So that's my note on that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ellen, can you just please come in 60 seconds, for civil society organizations, transformative adaptation, implementers on the ground, people who are implementing projects on a daily basis. What is the thinking around transformative adaptation? What does it mean for implementers on the ground? What is it that as a national government, as provinces, local government, that we're not seeing and that practitioners on the ground are seeing and that could be transformative? Ellen?
Thanks very much for putting me on the spot there. I think I'm just going to follow on from what the previous speaker had to say around but talking about the role of NGOs versus government. I mean, we do rely often on that project funding from donors to do work kind of in parallel with government. And we have ongoing sustainability issues with projects like this one that we're looking at over these few days. And there is a need to better tie in the work that we do with the government structures so that there can be sustained support. So it's an ongoing question of whether you run a parallel process to support adaptation at community level. Often NGOs are quite good at doing that in a community that they're embedded in. They can provide that long-term support, but how do we support government to play their role and work together? So I think there is a need for all of these different role players, and this meeting has quite successfully brought together quite a range of stakeholders here, not just the NGOs and the project implementers. It's got academia, it's got the different levels of government. And one of the processes you're trying to do is take these learnings and feed them into the policy processes. I think that's sometimes quite difficult to see how to do. Yes, I don't understand some of these ward processes, how you get into those local plans, but then at the national level, we have the climate change bill being promulgated. We have the the PCC, the Presidential Commission on Climate Change, also working on that level. How do we feed this kind of experience into those national policies? And I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. The question to you, colleagues, and to everyone in the room and to the audience is that, you know, like, was it John the Baptist in the Bible that asked and sent his disciple to Jesus and said, are you the one or do we wait for another? You know? And is it that case? Because when you're talking about transformational change, I mean, Jonathan earlier mentioned issues around, you know, structural changes that needs to happen, systemic issues, right? Is this just a buzzword, you know? You know, in building resilience in our communities, what does it really take? Are we going to look at behavioral changes? Are we going to look at political and historical systems that we have built over the years in the country? The issues that were mentioned earlier on around inequality, unemployment, the triple effects that we have in the country, poverty. Are we really going to give that an honest lens and really say, hell, was it you yesterday you were mentioning, you know, social issues as well, you know? Are we serious about this thing, or is it the case of John the Baptist? Do we look for another, or are you the one? Again, Mr. Ramaya touched a bit on, you know, donor funding, resource mobilization. What does this mean for the country? What does this mean for us where climate change is mostly funded or funding flows from the global north, you know, and not from the fiscus or from around, but from the global north? What does that mean for us with regards to implementation of projects? I don't want to sound like a preacher, right? But this is food for thought, right? We have about 40 minutes in the session. And that's where I want us to go, to really grapple with the issue, so that when you go back home and you sleep tonight, you can start thinking about whether you retire from this climate change walk, you know, and you look elsewhere, you know, or then we say, I see now people are boiling, hands are going up, you know. And what I'd like to do is, right, I had a lot on co-creation. I note your hands, colleagues. Please keep that fire burning. There was a lot of talk about co-creation and co-production. And I know Mr. Ramaya, Jonathan Ramaya, if he's still online, if he can talk in 120 seconds to the co-creation process that he ran with the projects that he is managing from the national department. And then we can start building on that on a transformative adaptation. Jonathan, over to you. 120 seconds, and it starts now.
Thank you, Pastor Thabang.
We can hear you, JR.
Can you hear me now?
We've got load shedding.
Can you hear me, Thabang?
Yeah, loud and clear. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much, Pastor Thabang. So quickly, 120 seconds, not a lot of time, but let me try and summarize what we did in terms of our co-creation process. It's really good to hear. I've heard this word a lot. People have been calling it different things, but essentially co-creation means that you develop projects right at the outset from scratch with project members. We're moving away from calling them beneficiaries. They are project members, because if you view them as project members and not beneficiaries, it means that they are enfranchised in the process. They have agency. And the inputs that we received at our co-creation workshops in the 3 districts that we've been working in showed us that communities, actually, project members have been taking their, they have their own agency and they've been doing things on their own prior to donor funding coming around. So the co-creation process was seen largely to try and bring these ideas together to firstly understand what the science is saying. So I think this is a requirement for any project that is classified as climate finance, adaptation projects. You've got to prove the climate rationale. A little bit difficult to do, but you have to try somewhere and start somewhere. And this is strategic. We found it to be strategic, especially in very politically sensitive districts that we've worked in, where you might find a councillor might want to have project interventions in his site. But if you start off that process, bringing everyone on board and saying, actually, we're using science, we're using evidence, we're using, for example, fire risk mapping or flood incidents that we've received from the disaster management centers, it's a lot easier to argue for why you're going to a particular ward or a particular local municipality and not going to another one. So from the start, the science base, and then what we did was we spent quite a bit of time, 3 weeks in some districts. That's apart from the additional technical assessments and site visits that we had to do. But we spent quite a bit of time trying to understand from communities themselves, from the districts, from academia, what the perspectives were and how the impacts play themselves out. You know, and it's anecdotal inputs that people were providing to us. And then from there, we grouped all of those impacts. And then we started to see what are the most appropriate interventions that can be undertaken to reduce the level of that impact. So you take guidance from documents that are already out there, but the point is to get everybody to contribute and to discuss these issues. So from there, you have your set of interventions. Everyone wants their own intervention, but what we ended up doing was we had a voting process. So it was democratic in a purely democratic country. We had a voting process and everybody had the opportunity to vote for the interventions that they thought would be the most effective. And we then shortlisted 3 or 4 interventions that we would work on in each of the 3 districts. I think, let me stop there. I think the end of that process or the outcome that we tried to gain is, number one, ownership from the districts themselves, because all we did was we went in there with a blank slate. We just said, this is the climate hazard we're going to be looking at, only one hazard per district. And then from there, everything was added onto this canvas. We did not go there as national government, as the sort of big brother where we tried to, push for a certain idea or not. It was totally owned by the district and then owned by the project members. So we thought that by doing that, the project would have more traction. We would have less challenges with implementation. So let me stop there, Thabang, and see if there are any questions. Thanks.
Yeah, ma'am, you had an input to give. I've also noted your hand, say. So maybe right after. Yeah, you've got the floor.
Thank you, Chairperson, and good afternoon to all the colleagues. Yes, I am Manto Hapola from Mpumalanga, Department of Agriculture. Unfortunately, I missed out on yesterday. So I've been opening my ears, trying to put my ear on the ground to really hear more about agriculture. With an exception of what Prof just indicated on the transformative, the one you call Trapotra. I've been really wanting to hear about the technologies that maybe the project came up with in terms of making our farmers resilient to climate change. And again, I'm also listening to the people that you are pointing at, province, local, NGOs. I thought I'll also see my colleagues, Bozagwetu from agriculture. Maybe they could share with me. So it's not the question, it's just that I'm really trying to find my niche in this whole thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. That's important, Mehapula.
Good day, everyone. My name is Sanele Vilagazi from uMngeni Water, which is a local water services utility. It's just on I don't know how to start. What I'm about to say is more of a throwing it out there type of comment, but I'd like to get a response for it or a feel for it. But I think in terms of with this talk about upscale, about transformative change, about seeing and making the impact through this work that is being done, I think also there needs to be a sort of a transformative change amongst ourselves. Very much in the way when I say that, I think with the regards that how we carry this project, these projects and the project work that we do carry out, whether it be research, implementation at all levels. I say that because in one of the breakaway sessions, I literally posed it as well, but I think I wanted a bigger audience as well, just to put it out there to see, because I didn't get much of a response in that group, where I think when I say the language needs to change amongst ourselves and the confidence and the transformative change needs to be seen, whereby how did we get to this point whereby we have to motivate and prove that, for instance, it was a basic example that when I think one of the examples that was made in the presentations was that when in comparison to the project being carried out, more funding was given to hardened infrastructure than your soft infrastructure interventions or soft interventions. Like getting to that, it's sort of a question of how did it come to the fact that we have to prove ourselves every time even when I am at meetings internally with our fellow colleagues from engineering departments. They've got a 25 million rand project to do some infrastructure projects. It's ticked without a thought or a question being laid on it. You come, you're talking about brush packs, you're talking about rehabilitating wetlands. You've got to make a report. You've got to submit to EXCO at such and such levels. And it's such an effort. And I think the question is, how did we get to that point whereby now we literally have to always prove a point for these projects and that they deserve their place in the table, they deserve to have and be on level par with, the more, you could say your more hardened infrastructure projects, to actually really make a point to say, no, it should be at the same level in terms of what my engineering counterparts might be doing in terms of the infrastructure projects that they might be putting in. So I think in terms of trying to answer that myself, I said, the problem is with ourselves. We're not carrying this enough to confidently put it out there to say that this work is making a change. Let's stop saying it's a pilot project or it's an initial startup project. Let's actually put it out there to say this works. It's been implemented. It's shown proof of its work, and we're implementing it, and we're very quite confident in what we're putting forward out there. And I think that change really needs to come in this room with the people that are championing these projects. Let's stop saying it's experimentative. Let's stop saying we don't know, we'll try and see. When a bridge is being put in across a river, no one says, we don't know if it's going to hold, or, it's going to be, when it's a bridge, it's a bridge. It's going to be put there, it's going to stick. There's no questioning around its structural integrity. So let's stop questioning some of these methods and interventions that we're putting through. So I'm sounding like a politician, but let's change the language ourselves so we can actually make sure that external bodies can actually say, okay, these guys know what they're talking about. Because engineers, nabo, they might be clueless, but when they speak, they really sound like they know what they're talking about. So let's do the same as well.
Great. All right. Thank you. Pearl. Okay, maybe let's start with Pearl and we'll end up with you, but I had recognized you first before Pearl. Before that, I have to call you to order. Colleagues, we can't be clapping for Usana like Pearl and not all the other speakers. So please, let's do it for everyone. Important remarks though. There's a case study in Amatola. We'll talk to that now. And Prof, I would want you also to talk to the issues of agriculture by Megapola as well. How involved were they in the project? Someone raised the issue about partnerships, public-private partnerships, how important that is, and it sounds like the Department of Agriculture there is somewhere and doesn't know its place and is still trying to find its place. And I like how you phrased your question, because you literally sounded lost in everything that was happening, you know? And how do we begin? Because transformative lens could be something as simple as every one of us every morning sweeping their own yard, Sanel, starting with individuals, you know? If everyone in South Africa clean their own spaces, you know, or everyone never threw a bottle of Coke outside of the car window when they are driving, what difference would that make, right? So please, Prof, you will touch on that. Maybe my lady go first, and then we'll have Pearl, and then Prof, you can answer that.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Kate. I'm a ward councillor here in uMngeni municipality. I think, wow, this is a whole lot more information, but I think vital to the bigger picture of where we are trying to go. I really need to commend everybody. I think it's been very informative, and I've definitely learned a lot. I just wanted to touch on, in terms of functions of local municipality versus provincial and national.
Great.
I know at a local level and here especially, you know, we just try to get the basics right, the basics of service delivery. So I think as a local government, we are quite dependent on our intergovernmental relations. So that the fact with Ms. Mbali talking about there are already implementation of rolling out of projects and plans. I think what happens, you know, being on the ground and going into communities, a lot of communities have got very different priorities. It's the food, it's a meal tonight, it's a beer after work, and it's a job. So employment is huge. So when we look as maybe other people seeing the bigger picture, or specialists in the different fields, we're seeing the real effect of illegal dumping, etc. So I think, like you had mentioned, the very basic low-hanging fruit, such as just education campaigns and letting people know that, you know, in order to get employment, we need to create a safe environment for business and that sort of thing. And by doing that, we can do that. So I'd just like to say that I do believe that education is key, and I would reach out to our other government departments to assist us as local municipality, and we would welcome you at uMngeni anytime to come engage with us as leaders in our community, so that we can ensure that the information is getting out there, whether it be campaigns through the schools. I think it's fundamental, because that's where it all starts.
Sure.
It's just a note. Thank you.
Great, Kate. Thank you so much. Yeah, now. Thanks, go ahead then.
I think I'm gonna build on what everybody has said. So something triggered by what Usli was saying earlier on, and what you said about, is transformation a buzzword? Is it something that we're just saying? And then I started questioning, what are we talking about here when we say transformative change? Are we clear about what we're talking about? Because for me, transformation is a journey. It's not a destination. So, and change happens when we change. So we always talk about transformation about like something that's going to happen there, but it doesn't. It happens with us, and it's a process. And then we get these projects that say, you know, after 3 years of your project, you must measure transformative change. I'm sorry, it does not happen in 3 years. So there's a lot of, you know, and we want to bend over backwards, you know, for donors and say, yes, it's gonna, but it's not gonna happen in 3 years. And if we agree to that, we're gonna make stuff up and lie at the detriment of the people that we're trying to assist, and at the detriment of ourselves. So I think we probably need to back to basics. What are we talking about when we're saying transformative change? What are we transforming? From what to what? What are we changing? Are we changing the system? And if it's a system, what system? Is it a social system? Is it a political system? Is it an ecological system? We need to be asking questions about the whole thing around transformation before we launch on to, we are going for transformative change.
Thank you. Faith, I'm noting you. I'm noting you. I know. I told you we're just warming up. We need another day for this, right? We only now beginning to define what transformative adaptation is, you know? And I see Pell is even getting emotional about it. So it's good. It means we're getting there. Prof, if you can just quickly respond to the issues around partnerships and talk to the issues on the Department of Agriculture.
This ask is now a difficult one. But I'm not, maybe not answering a specific question. I'm also just joining the debate, the discussion. I think they say that a journey starts with this first step, I think. So maybe answering your, contributing to your what you raised, I think we need to have a vision of where we want to go, and we need to take the first step. Once we take this next first step, the 3 years might not take us there, but we have to move in the right direction. The problem is we are not talking the transformative approach that we want to have. And so we are just playing in cycles. We're just doing projects that are not sustainable and so on. In terms of agriculture, what was done, I think when I was allocated this session, and I looked at the counter session, which is happening up in the chapel, I thought, you know, people were going to ask, what is it that was done? It is being discussed that side. Unfortunately, that's where they are talking about the transformative systems, you know. So that's where they're talking about how they've used drip irrigations, they've used the solar panels and whatever to enhance agriculture in a sustainable way in those areas. The others, you know, your mulching and so on, but these are things that might have been happening, might not have been happening in the villages. So it's about empowering them to know the value and what the contribution and how they relate to climate change, and maybe some of the things that are wrong and right in terms of climate change. The other question was in terms of partnerships. Do I have an answer to that? I think what my take is that, and I might respond to the wrong thing. My take is that we need to walk the journey together. And it's a big ask, I should agree, that when we are, and I'm talking about partnerships with the communities, you know, there could be partnership with other players, but as far as I'm concerned, I'm more interested in the ground level, you know, forming partnerships with us. And I think a lot of times in my experience over time, we all want to look educated, and we don't want to bring ourselves down to the level of and think in the same line. So it's very difficult to then convince anybody else from department of whatever, unless we are all changed inside ourselves to then relate to what is happening on the ground and communicate it in the right language when we meet with the other partners. I think that's where, and it's not easy. We have to let go of some of our egos, honestly.
Yeah. Thank you, Prof. Well, colleagues, Sanele, the hard and soft interventions debate, I think for me, in Amatole, the case study I'm talking to, when we went there and wanted to develop interventions, like Jonathan was saying, we were on the ground doing co-creation workshops, and we invited the engineering department, you know, and we had the conversations, you know, on ecological solutions versus those engineering solutions. And had a one-on-one where they agreed that, you know, some of these things, as opposed to scoping at them every time or putting a wall, you know, just take care of the wetlands upstream, you know, and that will take care of the problem in a long term, you know, and they agreed on those solutions. So I think conversations sometimes, you know, will help. But again, how you sell some of these things, like you said, you know. Pearl, an interesting thing, again, you know, we're doing research on the transformative adaptation agenda. So a framework for the country that we're trying to look at. What is this transformative adaptation, and, you know, what does it mean in context of South Africa in comparison to other countries? And so we spoke to Kevin Sutherland from UKZN, we spoke to UCT, you know, CSEC colleagues, ACDI, you know, Vets University and all of that, and trying to solicit information on this transformative adaptation, what it really is. And then a concept came up which warms my heart, you know, and they call it the systems pathway thinking. And that doesn't really look at the end or the outcomes at the end, you know. It tells you that this is a process, you know, which goes back to what Jonathan also spoke to earlier on around incremental change versus transformative change, right? Incremental change being those smaller little things that you are doing. You are sweeping your yard, individual aspects you're looking, but in a greater sense of things, you are making a difference, right? And that became interesting for us as well, not to start seeing it as an outcome or outcome-based thing, you know, but as a process towards something and realizing it, right? But how it will end off, we don't know. And that's why we're here. We're also soliciting these views and trying to understand. Are you the one to come, or should we wait for another? Like John the Baptist said, right? Faith, I'm going to take your comment.
No, it's fine.
Microphone, please. Please, microphone, Lindo. This is how it starts. I know. You know, you start by saying it's fine, and then you use up 10 minutes of the time.
No, Tabang. Thank you so much. I think the prof did cover what I wanted to say, and maybe perhaps colleagues, and thank you for asking the question. What are we talking about when we talk about transformative agenda? Because for me, you know, when you start talking about transformative, it kind of reminded me of the lady DG yesterday. Is it Swaimani? Yeah, the DG that presented yesterday. And I think how she summed up the work that they, you know, what they went through. For me, that is transformative. I don't necessarily need to see or say anything else. You know, it's not about systems change, but for me, transformative, it has to be people-centered. That's very critical, you know. So I guess how you approach it, it depends on where you're coming from, you know, and it could mean different things to different people. And I think Prof also summed it up very well when he was providing some feedback back then. So yeah, I'm still lost myself. I work with them on this work, so I don't know. I don't know. Yeah, maybe I'll listen to you guys and find out how you guys define it and view it. But yeah, for me, it has to. When I saw that lady talking yesterday, that for me is enough. You know. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Faith. We've got, I'm going to take Slindile. Slindile will be our last, and then I'll take some parting shots from our panel. And then we've got a last exercise to do. Slindile.
Thank you again. I don't want to comment on the systems thinking approach. It was adopted by award in the Building Resilience Projects, a USAID funded project in Mpumalanga and Limpopo. And there's a lot of learnings that came out of that program of work, which could kind of input to us unpacking transformative change and how we measure it and how we understand it and how we define the system. Because I think before we even measure it, we have to actually find a way of how do we map and what are the boundaries of our systems that we're trying to evaluate. But anyway, I'm not there. I just want to talk about the social capital, which I think for most of us sits very uncomfortably sometimes, and we have a lot of questions around that. And my comment is triggered by the guy who, I forgot the name, my apologies. He mentioned that at proposal development, do you engage people? And then we talk about partnerships and, in the spectrum of partnerships, it's like you're building trust and, you're getting to know each other, you collaborating, you're informing, and then at the last level, you co-creating stuff. But at projects design, we are expected to co-create first and then build a partnership. And then now there's the misalignment in that process that, those things don't meet. So, and then you have to kind of look at social capital and how do you then find a way to bridge that gap when the funder arrives, with the pocket of money, which then you have to, I don't know, figure out a way to, to sell your idea. But at the same time, I think there's lesson learned from processes and projects that happened before. So for me, one key lesson that has come through in the past years is the role of champions. Yeah. And champions now, it's a very kind of obscure kind of thing because it's not people wearing fan t-shirts, but it's essentially, traditional authorities or individuals in the communities that know and are embedded in that landscape. And sometimes it's NGOs, your INR, your ERS, your Matlatini, who have been invested in that landscape for a very long time and who've developed the social network and the social capital. So when the funding comes, they actually know what to do. You're not trying to kind of squeeze in processes in a short space of time. So I think those are my reflections. And I think I was just building on what Prof was saying around social capital. And that has been a big aha for me from these processes. Thanks.
Great. Colleagues, we need to decide if we want to clap. This is not acceptable. Okay, great. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for the inputs, indeed. It makes so much sense for me. Having a background in project implementation and still implementing projects at this stage, that they are, from this meeting as well, those aha moments that we need to revisit, particularly talking about transformative adaptation or development. Prof, I'm going to take you first, your parting shot, and then Lindo, Mohammed, and then Jonathan, lastly, virtually. Go ahead, Prof.
My parting shot is that you should not commit suicide. After this, the process should be reflective. We don't know it all. Don't feel too bad if what people are maybe driving for is not necessarily what you are doing. But what is important is to ask questions and say, where are we? What have we learned? What can we, bring on? How can we strengthen the programs, the activities that we are doing? If there's less inputs from the communities, if we didn't involve them at some stage, maybe there is a time. When we talk about development cycles, we need to, project cycles, I think all of you are aware. We talk about those cycles where we formulate and so on and evaluate and then reflect and come up with the next cycle. So similarly, in this transformative journeys and so on, we should say, ask after these 3 years, it's not all about singing. That's why I had a problem with my brother saying, we are there. We should be questioning, what have we done over the 3 years? It was a pilot because some of the things were really being tried and we didn't know where we're going. But if they have been successful, the next cycle should be strengthening those, and those that did not work, maybe we should take them out. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Prof. Lindo?
Cutting short. There's quite a lot of learning that came out from implementation of this project. I think as SANBI and other organization like DFFE, there's so much to learn. I believe that the lesson learned from this project should be packaged, and then it will help us to inform us in implementation of future project, because there's quite a lot of social learning that has happened, the technical learning that has happened. Yeah, for me, the social learning has been quite huge in this project. There were places where we went there to implement the project and they did not want us. But looking back now, we were able to do the job through those social processes that we had, and we've learned a lot from that. So I think the lesson learned from this project is quite huge. So yeah, thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Mohammed?
Thank you very much, Chair. I think from a regulatory and a registration body perspective, what we notice in the sector is that there's not enough skills transfer and not enough transformation and capacity transfer from the experienced individuals in the field towards the youth. I think we need to put an emphasis on skills transfer and transformation towards the youth and youth empowerment and youth development. And I think that from a regulatory body is what our take-home message would be. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you. Jonathan?
Thank you. Thabang, can you hear me?
Loud and clear. Please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you so much. Just a couple of things. I think the idea of discussing transformative adaptation is not to create something new and add another layer onto, for example, reporting that we already do or frameworks that we currently interact with, but it's for us to consider and challenge ourselves, think about new ways in which we can develop projects so that they do have a high impact and they are going beyond what we thought would happen. I think when it comes to donor finance, and this is the main source of finance for adaptation projects thus far in the country, we need to be very strategic about how we use these types of funds. And I'm glad to hear that the URP project, for example, might be scaled up into a bigger project, because these bigger funds, if they are to disperse any money or commit any money, they want you to prove that institutionally you can do it. Technically, it's possible. And then when it comes to implementation, you do have the capacity to implement these projects. So it's very important how we decide to use the little grants and funds that we do get. But I think in general, we should start to move away from this over-reliance on external sources of funding. Because they come, they come seasonally. It depends on a political situation from the origin of where it comes from. So, for example, Europe has its back against the wall now in terms of the conflict that's happening in the Ukraine. All of the funds, a lot of the funds are being allocated to those efforts. And we might not see some of those funds, especially because we are now an upper middle income country. So South Africa is viewed as a country that can get on and do, fund its own projects. So these funds are really dwindling from external sources. And I think we need to put a lot more effort into funding these through the finances and the resources that exist in South Africa itself. Thank you.
Great. Thanks. Thank you. Let's give a warm round of applause to our panel members. Okay. And colleagues, we've got about 15 minutes left of this session, and I want us to use it effectively, right? We're not leaving early here. We're here to work, colleagues. Now, for the people online, I'd like your recommendations on the chat, right? From this session, what was your take home? What would you think transformational development to building adaptive capacity is? Just place it on the chat. And for the people that are in the room, can you please just quickly stand up and pair into twos? Yeah, find a mate. Hopefully someone that you've not spoken to, that you don't know, you've never interacted with before. Quickly, quickly, quickly. Good. I see some pairing. Hey, this. Okay. Faith, you can be a one group. Yeah, please move, move, move. We only have 10 minutes. Colleagues, 2. Hey, loba buhleli yedwa. Uphi umahamba yedwa? Asimtholele umuntu. Quickly. Let's pair up. Let's pair up. Okay. Quickly, right? The exercise is this. You introduce yourself, right? Introduction is 5 seconds per person. Look, I'm Tabampaho from the DFFE. That's it. Then the next person introduces instructions. Colleagues. Order, 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 please. Now, you introduce yourself, right? And you say to the next person, if you were to be a vegetable, which vegetable would you be, right? That's another 5 seconds, right? Then the next person again, the 10 seconds, you introduce yourself. If you were to be a vegetable, which vegetable would you be, right? 10, 10, 20 seconds, right? Then the next step is, right? In the next 5 seconds, the other person tells the other one about the take-home message, the recommendation coming out of this meeting with regards to transformative adaptation or development, right? Is that clear? All right. When we're done with that, you will choose one person between the two of you to just stand up and the other will sit down. And then we will just say those recommendations so that we can note them for the plenary tomorrow. Is that clear? Is that clear? Okay, the time starts now. All right. No, thanks, Mom. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Great. You're leaving now? All right. Where you going, Joburg? Back to Joburg. Okay, great. Prof, thank you so much. Yeah, yeah, you can leave. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, we're finalizing now. We'll be done by 5. Oh, that's a little bit 6:30. Okay. Thanks. Okay. Yeah, I'll let them know as well if you, I can let them know. Good. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Your time is up. Sorry. All right. All right. Can we wind down? Smile at me. Can you smile at John the Baptist? Sis Lungi, are you done? Aibo, we don't need a dissertation here, not a thesis. Hey, Kate, you done? You look like you're done. Super efficient, hey? Okay. Vegetables, your attention. Veggies. Veggies. Hell, you look like you're going to be spinach now. Okay, where do we start? Kate, shall we start there? Who's gonna stand up there and do the? I need everyone that's going to give us a recommendation to stand. Yeah, whoever's going to give the recommendation must stand. Now, everyone, whoever's going to give the recommendation must stand.
Yeah, I don't know in what context it would be a recommendation, but I think
Colleagues, attention.
what we are walking away with after today's engagements is understanding that everybody in the room has got an aim. We might not have a definition for transformation, but everybody's got an aim to build better, stronger communities, and that by all doing that analysis of how everybody can contribute, we would be able to adapt the capacity building accordingly to achieve those goals. And then the importance of collaboration. We realized we could have funding, but if there's no research, if there's no implementers, if there's no collaboration in every department of the country, we won't be able to achieve this transformation and share knowledge and implement these projects.
Okay,
Yeah.
so were you a tomato, carrot?
I was a carrot because I could not put my makeup on one day and just lie under the sand and nobody would see me, but I'd have great hair. And then we had a cauliflower.
Great. Faith, you next.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Thank
15
you.
seconds.
I was a carrot. You know, the reality is that from our side, we confused as ever, you know, because we wondered, what is it that's so different about this concept that we have not been doing? And I'm talking about, I mean, everything that we've been doing, be it as a country, let me just talk as a country. We've always wanted to transform lives. That has always been the objective, to address the triple challenges that we're experiencing as a country. But how come now that we're talking transformative adaptation, what do you call it? Yeah, whatever that you're calling it. And we're wondering why. I mean, are we always going to come up with concepts, you know, because it's not new. That's what we aim to do anyway, you know? So yeah, we just confused. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you, Faith. Next one. Please, quickly, quickly.
Okay.
Let's move.
My turn. Okay. From both of
Please,
us.
please stand if you can.
Yes. So I was a potato. Manutula was a carrot. I would take home. I think for me, it's what Mohammed shared around investing in youth and, you know, playing the more skilled, practitioners, assisting and mentoring the younger professionals. And Manutula was that recognition, she was highlighting the words shared by Sis Pearl around, transformative journey rather than just thinking it's an instant, it's a point in time. Thanks.
Great. Next one, 10 seconds. Okay, moving along. Please stand if you can.
I was a Ildombe. So our recommendation was that we should enhance more community involvement so that at the end they can finally see the benefits in order they can finally be able to see the benefits if they are involved from the inception.
Perfect.
I
Great.
won't waste any more time. Thank you.
Great stuff. Thank you so much. Next one, moving swiftly along.
Hi everyone. I'm a tomato and my partner was potato. Just our final remarks, actually, we concurred with what Prof. Madara was saying, which was don't commit suicide. And that's because if you
indicated, we're talking to community involvement, involving the communities at the inception of the projects, not when the projects are ongoing, so that we could have fruitful results.
Great.
Yeah, I won't say a lot.
Sounds good. Thank you. Please. Why are you clapping for the onion? You could clap for the carrot, you know? Itumbelona. I mean, really. All right.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm the onion because you can't start a curry without me. Yes. Okay. So I'll take home is that basically the social aspect is probably the most important part in projects, because if the people that live there understand the reasoning behind, when the project ends, they can carry on with the implementation. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. So I'm a potato. Don't ask why. I'm a potato. He's a carrot. And I think our takeaway message was mainly also on just thinking about transformation not being an overnight process, but just, you know, being a process, and also climate change being a moving target. So we learn by doing. So we keep on adapting depending on the cases or the context that we are working on. And then also just like that, it opens an opportunity for us to ask more questions. Like, for example, transformation for who and at what scale?
Great. Thank you so much.
Good evening, colleagues. My vegetable here just changed. He was a carrot. He was a carrot because he said carrots can be eaten like either you cook it or raw, you can still have it raw. So now he just changed to say he's now a cucumber. I don't know why. I'm a spinach, colleagues. And then our recommendation, colleagues, here, we've been talking about education. I think the community needs to be taught on things, and then awareness needs to also to be raised, because I remember in the site that we visited yesterday, there was an issue of using an alien species to kill the diseases on their plants. That was okay according to them and also according to me, but it's wrong according to the standards. That is actually maladaptation. We cannot use things that are wrong to solve problems, although they're working. We cannot use them. So we recommend that more teachings must be done in the communities. Communities must be involved from the starting of the project so that they can understand, and then they must be taught. Thank you.
That can only be from a spinach and a cucumber, eh? Thank you, colleagues. And then moving along.
Green piece of lettuce and red hot chili pepper.
Oh.
So I'll be quick. I think the main takeaway and the contribution that we had was mostly on just being wary of taking the quantum leap with regards to the transformative adaptive change and sort of the conversation that we've been having around the upskill and being able just to balance that because it needs to be quite an intricate balance. If you go too much one way, it could actually tip over. So I think that's the main one in terms of just being wary in terms of the process and the movements. As I think has been mentioned, it's a journey. So let it be that in terms of the process as well.
Last but not least, the three musketeers.
Okay, so we had a group with a carrot, a green bean, and a tomato.
Who was the green bean? Could only be Tansile.
Okay, so the 3 points from our group is that take-home message is that we need to address this issue of us always having to make the case for investments in ecological infrastructure.
Yeah.
That if we're having a transformative approach, then we also need to stop othering in the sense that we keep talking about communities as if there are people out there, but we are all members of communities one way or other. We are all project beneficiaries one way or other. Some of us has jobs because we are working in projects, therefore we are project beneficiaries. And that we need to ensure that social learning and social innovation is embedded in our project developments.
Great stuff. Colleagues, thank you. Oh, the last group, and then I can thank you. Please close the door. We're gonna have a nice item now. The last item is going to be the best.
Okay, Tande Gambambo from DFFE. We chose to be a sweet potato and butternut because we're versatile. So what we said that our thoughts about today is that future projects need to be based on real life situations. It can't be based on situations that are divorced from the reality. So the projects need to be based on the problems that communities face and be in touch with that type of thing so that we can achieve an impact. And then there was a question online.
Ladies and gentlemen, my assistant.
Okay, the question is, how do we ensure the transformative development coordination function remains live at local implementation level?
Who is it from?
Nolu Fefe.
Nolu Fefe. Yeah, that's a good question, Sis Nolu. I mean, like we've discussed, transformative adaptation could be anything from the smallest of, efforts and interventions. For example, from faith's perspective, could be working with the sectors and developing and reviewing their strategies. Someone can come in further to that. It could be risk and vulnerability assessment. It could be response plans. It could be further down going into the EIP, so the environmental implementation plans and implementing projects on the ground. Say projects that needed to be in integrated development plans and going further into that to see implementation, right? So it's a fabric that we're still establishing at this moment. Colleagues, we've come to the end of the session. Now, this is the last item. I need you to stand for this item. No, my partners left, even the one online. So I didn't discuss that with anyone. So I'm not a vegetable. Colleagues, now we are going to give ourselves the biggest role. You know, I see these people that were not here to work and they came for holiday, they're already outside, right? So now we're going to move them with a big role. Either you clap hands, if you can scream, you scream, if you can whistle, you whistle. But this is for yourself, for the 3 hours that you spent in this session. In 3, 2, 1.